I'm Vivien Oswell, and I guess I'm one of the founders of the Guild of Harwich Artists, although we started out, Georgia Dearborn and I, another local artist, started out just showing our art at Art in the Park, and soon Fran Givas and some others picked up on that, and I don't know whether that was the start of the Guild, but at any rate they said we had to be part of their organization to show there. And I kind of think they had to be part of our organization. We were there. But that set the rules. I can remember one Saturday, it was overcast, but the forecast was good. So Georgia and I decided to go down and just wait for it to clear and before we set up, you know. And they came and said, well, the Guild didn't issue that we could be open today because it's supposed to be stormy, you know. And we said, but it's going to clear. And they said, yes, but the rules have already been laid down, so you just can't show today. So it kind of limited our own love of art and our one with the public, you might say. But we soon adjusted and let them set the rules. And one of the things later on, George and I both had prints of our work, and they didn't like that, so we weren't supposed to be allowed to sell our prints. And I said, well, it's a public place, and we were here before you were, and I'm going to have my prints out here. I never withdrew them. I always kept them. And you just have to be a little bit independent sometimes, and nobody could do anything about it, and so that was that. But I noticed one of the artists that set up next to me had some prints, and after that he couldn't show them, and he was kind of disappointed because he obeyed the rules and I didn't. But I feel that the art was a gift from God to me. And I don't feel that human beings can put a limitation on that. I think I should be able to do what I feel good about doing, not self, but I feel if this is God's talent given me, then He can give me the directions. And so that's the way I've always operated, and no one's ever found any objection. Kind of interesting, later on my grandson got very interested in painting. And he used to set up with me at the Guild at the art shows, and no one ever objected. And that was so sweet because he was able to sell his little pieces of artwork too. And they just allowed me to embrace him in my membership, you might say. Nobody ever questioned it. And he enjoyed it. My brother-in-law used to work for a time machine company. And so he had a lot of these time machine, is it Artego cards, kind of manila cards, like a time machine would put in.
Yes.
And they were printed wrong, so the back was clear, but the front had something on it, you know. And he used to use those as a background and then put on a piece of torn colored paper and then put his painting just a 1/4 inch showing of the deckled edge of the torn, and then show his artwork, and he would sell those for $15 a piece, little original pieces of art.
Wow.
And he was so thrilled, you know, that was his little income and fun, and he did them there. It was really nice. And it's kind of using what we have on hand, you know, because I had 1,000 of these manila cards, and he just used them as background. I wished I'd saved some of those pieces. His artwork was interesting. So original, you know, teenager. But anyway, that's a little about some of the early experiences at Art in the Park. Then gradually, I don't know whether that's where the Guild started or whether they saw us there and decided to take over what we were doing and have the Guild there instead of just us. But that day that we were there and it was overcast, they didn't show that day, but they told us we couldn't show either. we had to go by the guild rules, you know. So to the most part we did, really. I would say back in those times it was maybe 25 or 30 people, and it's probably now 125 or 130. And it included associate artists. In other words, the artist might be the husband or the wife, but the other one is an associate member, and they paid $5 less a year. I don't remember what we paid, $20 or $25. But the associate members were the husbands and wives that didn't paint, but they were members and paid $5 less than the members did or something, you know, that kind of organization. Kind of loose and easy, but nice. It was very nice. I think at that time I was working completely in oils. I gradually picked up watercolor and acrylics. And of the three, I find the acrylics very versatile. It can be used with a palette knife like an oil. It can be used with water and diluted and used on paper as a watercolor. And it can be used as a painting medium rather than a palette knife medium. It's very versatile and very corrective. And I use it a great deal, and I even use it as an underpainting when I do oil paintings. I do my underpainting in acrylics, and you can put the oils over acrylics, but you can't put acrylics over oils. They won't adhere to the oil. Kind of an interesting thing, but people have to learn from experience, you might say. But I gradually got into all the media and actually sell and paint in all three media. But mostly acrylics, it's so versatile. But formal portraits, and I've gotten as much as $7,500 for one formal portrait. A life-size man at a desk, and an organization asked me to do that painting from Michigan. Someone that knows my artwork in Michigan submitted that I was a good portrait artist, and so they had me commission me to do this portrait of this man that was the head of an organization but now gone, and gave me a little snapshot or a small 4x5 photo of him. And they wanted a life-size painting of him at his desk, which was what the little snapshot was of. And I said, I don't know the color of his eyes, I can't see the lines of age on his face, it's too small a shot. And my friend says, you can do this. She said, pray about it. So she said, please accept the commission, I know you can do it. And so it took me a while, but I did the painting. Then I let the organization just pay whatever they felt it was worth to them. And the most I've gotten for a formal painting was for $3,000 to $5,000. They sent me $7,500 for that portrait. It was the most expensive portrait I did, and it has its own room and everything to celebrate this man, you know. So that's kind of interesting in Michigan. But it was one of those parade paintings. I call them parade paintings. All the good ones are parade paintings. A lot of them we do because people want them, and you just can't. You've got to turn out stuff, but it's not original work. It's just kind of working on what they want done and working from what they want done, and that's a little different. And but I guess every artist has to do a certain amount of that, just to pay the bills and buy the supplies, you know. But the good art is inspired art, and every time I finished an inspired painting, I would look at it and say, I wish I had done that. I would feel so separated from the talent that it was like I was watching myself paint, and then stood amazed, and I thought, and instead of keeping this, I've got to sell it. Kind of a funny thing, but it was interesting, I think, to the artist creating it. I think it's nice to know what an artist feels when they do something really creative. And that's what they feel. They feel like, gee, I would like to have this. And I've painted it to sell, which is kind of silly, you know. Kind of turns everything around backwards. But it's been an interesting life. My artwork has been a very interesting life. I meet wonderful people, and I enjoy every bit of it. I've taught all these years, and I feel very free in teaching, that you're just sharing what is a gift to you, and then it allows me to see the individual's worth. In other words, I don't teach people to paint like me. I teach people to explore their own talent and bring out what I see as their work, not learn from what I do, only use brushes or what I apply paint or mix colors. But the painting is their talent, and that's what a good teacher wants to bring out, their talent, not teach them to paint, but let other people see the qualities they have in their original work, and that's wonderful. I've taught ever since I started painting, because it seems to come along with it. Someone will say, show me how to do that, and I'll show you how I did it. Then you can show me what you can do. And so it kind of goes on with the exploration of each individual's talent, I think. My very first painting, I'll have to kind of tell you the history of how I started. My sister majored in art at Mass Art School, and married her husband, who was at Mass Art. And he turned out to be an engineer, which was how he used his art training. She turned out to be a pianist, which was really, her talent was in music more than art. And I was a mother and a wife, and I lost 4 years of my marriage with the war. My husband was overseas the first 4 years of our marriage. So we did have a son and a daughter, or a daughter and a son. She came first. And with it, neither of them are artists. I don't think talent is necessarily passed on generations. I think that generations inspire other members of the generation to paint. But I don't think it has anything to do with physicality, really. But that's my opinion. But at any rate, neither of my children are artists, but they have wonderful talents. They're both wonderful people. And my husband didn't realize he had a talent, but after he retired from his work, which was kind of maintenance work, and he was a machinist, but he loved being outdoors, so he went into outdoor maintenance instead. He watched me paint all these years, and when he retired, he says, I think I'd like to try painting. And it's surprising how much he had learned by watching me paint. And I think the only thing he needed, there were two things he very much needed to learn. One was organization. He had the same problem I had when I began painting. I could cut 4 inches off anything I painted. The first 4 inches at the bottom just wasn't important. I had to learn to eliminate that from my vision. And I cut a little card to say what would be the equivalent of a 16 by 20, but a couple of inches. And I would look through that, and that eliminated this extra vision that I put in things, so I didn't have to keep cutting off 4 inches of my paintings, which then made them unframeable because they were all like standard sizes. And actually, that was a big step in my art experience. And the other one was the use of mediums. I started in oils, but I soon wanted to try the other mediums, and I tried several types of acrylics, and found that one was much better quality than others, and stayed with that. And then I went into watercolors because it was a demand for it, and it's much more demanding media than oil and acrylics. Watercolor requires really good sense of drawing and simplicity, and good materials. To do a good watercolor, you need good paper and you need good brushes. Anybody that has failure with watercolor is because of their brushes and their paper. It's not the artist, but you need controllable brushes and good paper. And poor paper is just a nonsense in watercolor, because once watercolor paper is wet, if it's good paper, it stays as it is. They called it 300-pound paper. I don't know if that means much to most people, but it's the quality of that paper. And when you put water on it, it stays flat. When you put water on cheap watercolor paper, it swells or reduces and it distorts whatever you put on it. So there's a lot of sense in good brushes and good paper if you're going to do watercolor. And I had a wonderful experience in learning that, because I feel God supplies everything I need. And the Harwich Poets store, which used to be at the corner of Main Street and Cross Street, where now I think George's Pizza's there, but at any rate, that originally was the start of that art store. And they had a fire and they lost most everything, but the owner of it gave me the old watercolor paper, which was, or the watercolor paper which was wet and damaged and discolored, and it all washed back flat because of the good quality of the paper. And so that's how I learned about watercolor paper, was actually with this fire and disaster. And I became the owner of several sheets of 300-pound watercolor paper, which you can't damage and you can't wreck and you can repaint with. It's wonderful quality paper. And I became the owner of several sheets of that, and it really gave me education, you know. And then the brushes survived, some of the brushes survived. Sometimes disaster becomes the mode of invention and supply. So that was interesting in my art background. But eventually people wanted me to show them how, and I began teaching. I was born in June, and I understand some people believe that people born in June are natural teachers. And if that's true, it may be the reason that I became a teacher, because I love to teach and I love to see the individual talent and bring that out in the individuals. And I've taught all the years that I've painted, and I love teaching. I love painting. I'm happiest with a brush in my hand. My first paint set, yes, I was married, and the war was over, and we had 2 children, and we had a home made out of a barn, but it was a beautiful home. A nice structured barn, but it became a wonderful home. And then we furnished it and had a couple of children. And now I had everything in good order. What will I do? Well, I decided I'd hook rugs, so I bought some McGowan rug pattern and started hooking it according to the McGowan pattern. Then I realized I could make my own design, and I did my own rugs from my own designs. And I thought, well, if I could hook a rug, my sister said, well, if you can hook a rug, you could paint, because you're designing something. And so she gave me a little set of oil paints. I think it was 3 by 8 inches, and it had 12 little tubes, size of your baby finger. And 2 of them were black and white, of course, but the others were colors. And she said, if you don't like these, give them back to me, because she had gone to art school and she could always use more supplies. But I took the art paintings and the oil paintings and painted my first painting, which was from a Christmas card of a covered bridge in a winter storm. And I called her up and I said, I've just finished my first painting with these oil paints. And she said, what did you paint? And I said, a snow scene of a wagon coming through a covered bridge with snow on the ground. She said, how many colors did you use in the snow? And I said, everything in the box. She says, you're a born artist. In other words, to paint white, you need a good white. It includes all colors. It's an absence of colors, but it's there nonetheless, like a prism. When you look in a prism, it's clear, but all the colors are there. With white, it's the same way. And the minute you add white to something else, it loses the purity of color. If you add white to red, you get pink. You have to have light red by using thinner red paint. You cannot lighten red with white. It changes the quality. It's really a wonderful lesson. Anyway, I became an artist and learned from experience more than anything else. We learn more from our mistakes than we do by success. Our greatest success is in seeing the difference between something that's a mistake and something that's good. And so we're our own teachers, really, to a great degree. And I love painting, I love teaching. I absolutely lose a sense of time when I paint. I have no idea of time. I burn more suppers. My husband would come home and sniff when he came in the door, and what aren't we having for supper? And he says, you cannot paint and cook at the same time. You've got to do one or the other, but you can't do both. And it's true, especially green beans. They burn the quickest of anything. So anyway, we learn from experience. A friend of mine realized I was painting, and she said, could you do a painting of this? And I remember it was birch trees. And I said, yes. I says, there's no difference in what you paint. It's just all shapes and shades of color. So one painting is never any harder than another. And so I painted it, and it was, I said, it was of birch trees. And I painted it for her, I thought, just as a kindness, and she wanted to pay me for it. And I said, oh, I don't think I can charge for painting. I've never had any lessons. And she says, but I love my painting, and I couldn't accept it, she said, unless I paid you. So that was my first paid painting, and it was of birch trees. And she said, if you can paint this, I wonder if you could paint a portrait. And I said, I should be very good at portraits, because my actual living was made in what they call photographic retouching. I worked on negatives, correcting, Acme. Kids had their high school pictures taken, and they had Acme, and I would take the Acme off the negatives, and so their photographs would come through with clear skin, you know. And so I was studying faces, thousands of faces on these negatives in photography, and I was a good photographic retoucher. I was trying to think how I learned that talent. You know, my mother and dad were divorced, and my dad had custody of my sister and I. And we visited my mother on school vacations. And while I was visiting my mother one summer, we were staying in a cottage along the Connecticut River in West Springfield, Mass. And in that little cottage, I was visiting with a neighbor's son, a young Jewish boy, and I was doing a lot of pencil sketching. And he wanted to take my pencil sketching home to show his father. And I says, your father couldn't be interested less than my pencil sketches. He says, my father is very interested in talent. And he says, I think you have talent. I was around maybe 12, he was around 9. And he took my sketches home to show his father, and his father came over to visit and meet me and said I had such a talent with sketching. He was sure I was a good candidate to be a photographic retoucher, and would I like to learn about perhaps making a career of correcting negatives, faces on negatives, that was a wonderful field, but very few people had the talent for it, but he felt I had a talent for it. And that got me into photographic retouching. And he introduced me to a photographer, and my father took me to meet the photographer. And the photographer said, for $300, I'll teach your daughter to retouch negatives. And he says, $100 a month for 3 months. Believe me, if she hasn't learned to do this in 3 months, she'd never be any good at it. So he accepted the $100. Before that month was over, he was using my negatives and earning money from them, and I realized that. And I was only 9 years old, and or 12 years old, can't remember. But at any rate, I realized he was using my negatives and earning money from the prints he was making from them. And I said, that's not good business. I says, I'm paying you, and yet you're earning money from my work. I should not be paying you, you should be paying me. What do you pay retouchers to correct negatives? He says, 25 cents a head. And I said, so I don't pay you any more for teaching me, but now you stop paying me for the negatives that I'm doing. And that put me into the business of photography retouching. But I had a good little business head, I guess, at any rate. I was a photographer retoucher for 38 years, and then I started painting portraits, and I realized that my painting was outpaying me better than the retouching was, so I dropped retouching, went into painting. The first guild member that I remember was Fran Gibbeth. As I don't know if I mentioned it before, but Georgia Dearborn and I were showing our artwork at Art in the Park in Harwich Port. And Fran Gibbeth came by, and she said, we should have the Guild of, I don't know if she started the Guild then or whether it was already started, but she said, the Guild should be here selling their paintings, not just the two of you. So it became a Guild activity, and then we were under the Guild rules. From then on, if they said it was a rain date, nobody could show, we weren't allowed to go out even if it cleared. We had to follow their rules. But that's kind of how the Guild of Harwich Artists started. And then after we got into it, she was president of it for a while, and I was president of it for a while. I guess everybody in the Guild that had any talent became president of it for a while. Milton Welt was. Wonderful man, wonderful artist, wonderful friend. And so our background with the Guild of Harwich Artists was that background. I'm working on a commission of Witchmere Harbor, which is kind of interesting because the lady that has commissioned me to do this has just sold her house in Chatham, and the people that bought her house wanted to keep all the paintings that were on the wall, 7 of which were my original paintings. And she had just bought or having a house built in the same neighborhood. Now she had a neighbor that had all the paintings of mine that she loved. So my painting that I'm working on is of Witchmere Harbor for this lady. And she showed me a picture of her original Witchmere Harbor, which I did years and years ago. And it can't be like it because now her neighbor owns that. So what I'm working on is for her, and it's from a shot she took. And so that now she wants to replace my 7 paintings, but with all different originals, hers. So this is how the supply goes on with talented artists, I guess. That's kind of interesting. Because I'm 96 years old, and to be doing an original commissioned artwork, I think is rather remarkable. A lot of people feel that I've got good steady hands and good eyes. I paint without glasses, and I paint with control with my hands and brushes. I've got a room full of paintings upstairs. I've got 2 galleries, the Guild Gallery and the 820 Main Gallery. And 820 Main Gallery has maybe 30 of my paintings there. The Guild only has an 8x8 space, which is not a lot. But the Guild Gallery, but the 820 Main Gallery is my main place of showing. I used to show in Hyannis, but I don't drive anymore, so getting paintings to and from kind of eliminated that. And so now I just show in those two places. And I'll tell you that I think the value of original artwork has gone out the window right now. Photography with these cell phones has taken over, and people don't bother with paintings on their walls. They just have cell phones, more cell phones, and more cell phones. Occasionally when they build a new house and they want a big painting, then they come for a large piece of art. So my paintings now are all large pieces of art because not many people do large paintings. They're all doing loads of little ones thinking these will sell. They won't, because people don't bother put them on the walls. They just look at them on their cell phones and then get more. It's a renewing kind of view of things rather than owning set pieces. I see the change. I don't think everyone sees it, but I see it.
Do you have any advice for someone who's just starting to paint?
Just love it. And if it's good, people will want it and people will buy it. And you'll find you're a teacher because people will want to know, how did you do this? Show me. And I said, that leads you into teaching. That's just how it started with me. Yeah, it comes to you rather than, anyway, it's a sharing of a God-given gift. You just do what comes naturally, you know. And I love to teach and love to paint.